Brothers and sisters, it's a great pleasure to see you again here and have this special gathering. I hope I will make this gathering meaningful. Maybe many of you are quite familiar with the topic, the Four Noble Truths. It has been taught again and again by many masters from time to time, but still the Four Noble Truths remain the more essential message of the Buddha. And it's really important point out of all the different types of teachings that Buddha has delivered. So from that point of view, today, once again, you are listening to the same topic. I hope I won't be boring you. I hope to keep you entertained and alert and active throughout the time. So the first most important thing is to cultivate a right motivation. According to the tradition, you are supposed to do that while we have recited these three verses of bodhicitta, the refuge and the bodhicitta. Refuge is a right motivation to make our engagement outstanding from a regular engagement of mundane activities. And bodhicitta is a motivation which makes our engagement furthermore precious and valuable in the sense of making it a practice of bodhisattva. So from these points of view, these two mentalities, the bodhicitta and the refuge, is very important. So try to cultivate the mind of refuge and altruistic intention to achieve the Buddhahood, just for the benefit of all the sentient beings. So try to do that, and it is essential not just at your part, even for my side, it is very important, equally as it is important for you. So understand that. Now, with skipping a lot of preliminary steps, because we have a very limited period today and very limited time here in hand. So I would like to jump directly to the topic. The Four Noble Truths are explained in all the different traditions of Buddhists that exist in the world. Basically, we have three well-known traditions. The southern tradition, which is also known as Theravadan tradition, and Chinese Mahayana, and then we have Vajrayana tradition. Actually, according to the Tibetan scriptural understanding, Vajrayana and the Mahayana are not two different traditions. Vajrayana is a portion of the Mahayana. Mahayana is a bigger group that includes the Vajrayana inside it. Somehow, all over the world, nowadays it is well known to have three different traditions. When it comes to explain the essential topic. The teachings on the Four Noble Truths, all these different traditions, they agree that the Four Noble Truths, the teachings on the Four Noble Truths, are the very basic and foundation teachings of the Buddha. In fact, the Buddha's first sermon also was on the Four Noble Truths. There are scholars who claim that there was another kind of sermon before that, but kind of in the general understanding, the common understanding between all the scholars is that the Buddha's first sermon, or the turning of the wheel of Dharma, was the Dhammachakra Parivartan Sutra, or Dharmachakra Parivartan Sutra. It depends on which language we use, in Pali and Sanskrit. So, in that sutra, Buddha exclusively taught the Four Noble Truths. And he taught the Four Noble Truths to his kind of primary disciples, the five disciples with whom he was very, very kind of well acquainted. So from that onward, the teachings on the Four Noble Truths became the foundation of Buddhist practices and the Buddhist teaching. And it is very clear in the Vinaya scriptures and other scriptures that the teachings on the Four Noble Truths were the main method of Buddha to guide or to lead a kind of common disciple or the follower towards the achievements of, we say there are four different levels of achievement according to the general common Buddhism, like stream entry, non-returner, once returner, non-returner, and the arhathood. So that was one of the main technique that was employed by the Buddha throughout his lifetime. Actually, whenever Buddha had any encounter with any new disciple, he immediately doesn't use to teach the teachings on the Four Noble Truths. In the beginning, he used to converse with those people, talk to them about benefits of doing the practice of generosity, charity, and practice of morality and all those things. And after some time, when he realizes that this person is a suitable person to teach the Four Noble Truths, and through that guide him towards the attainments, then only he starts to reveal the teachings on the Four Noble Truths. That was his technique. So it's a very basic foundational teaching of the Buddha. So it's commonly accepted in all the Buddhist different Buddhist traditions. But now we have little differences in explanation of the Four Noble Truths. Of course, the Four Noble Truths are same. Namely, in English language we say the truth of suffering, truth of the origin of suffering, and truth of the cessation of suffering, and the true mark that leads to the cessation of suffering. So these are the Four Noble Truths. But the way the Four Noble Truths are explained or taught in different traditions appears little different, but it is not contradicting against each other. So that is what I would like to focus today. So, and upon that, I would also like to let you notice differences in between the terms those are used to express the same meaning from time to time. So it may be possible that when you read different literature on similar topic, it may confuse you. So it's really important to kind of have an approach, like an open-minded approach when you are trying to learn the Buddha's teachings through different versions of translation. So from that point of view, first, let me explain the Four Noble Truths. According to the Theravadan tradition, the Four Noble Truths are explained through 12 insights. Each Noble Truth is explained through or kind of practiced through or needed to be practiced through 3 insights. So when we multiply it 3 by 4, it becomes 4 insights, 12 insights. So that is the approach that is very commonly and basically used by the Theravadan tradition. Now in that sense, in the general overview of these insights that is related to the each noble truth are like this. They say the Sach Jnana, that means knowing the nature of the truth. So that is, or the wisdom of the nature of the truth, or comprehending the nature of the truth. That is the first insight that is related to any kind of these 4 noble truths. And the second insight is Kichanyana, that is knowing what needs to be done, connecting with that truth. How to relate to that truth. That is the second level of insight that is important. So then Kattanyana, that is accomplishing what needs to be done related to that truth. Accomplishing the wisdom and the attainment related to the truth, whatever specific truth that is. So this is like 3 insights related to each truth. So here, the concept in many times is by those people who have kind of limited understanding and knowledge, they may look at it as quite contradicting compared to the Mahayanist approach of explaining or teaching the 4 noble truths through the 16 characteristics or 16 aspects of the noble truths. But in actually, it is not contradicting. In Tibetan literature, we find that when the first sermon or the first turning of the wheel of Dharma is explained, it is always given the name. The sutra which recites the noble truths 3 times. So that means each noble truth is repeatedly taught in 3 times. So what does it mean? On the first repetition, it just introduces the noble truth. And in second repetition, it explains what needed to be done, how to relate to that noble truth. And then on the third repetition, it teaches how to attain the resultant state through relating to that noble truth. So this is not a kind of foreign concept for the Tibetan Buddhism and the Mahayana Buddhism. This is within there, but the Mahayana Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism didn't have kind of emphasized that much on this aspect of the teaching, or this style of the teaching. So, this sutra itself says that, in Tibetan we say, Dini Dunge Pape Dembao. That means this is the suffering, the first truth of the noble beings. So this line of the sutra introduces the suffering, the first noble truth. Then on the same topic, it says that Dungel Shevacha, that means understand the suffering or know the suffering. So this is how to relate to that suffering, how to relate to that noble truth, the first noble truth, which was introduced before that, the suffering, how to relate to it. So it was explained in that next second line. And third line says that Dunge Shevacha di Shevacharme. That means suffering can be understood, but not in that way. So what does it mean? It explains, after relating to that, what can be attained. What can be attained? After knowing the suffering, there doesn't remain any suffering that could be known in absolute manner. Suffering doesn't exist in its absolute nature. It's empty and absent of the absolute nature. So in that way, when someone really kind of penetrates through that, the person attains the realization of the suffering. When they penetrate through that ultimate nature of the suffering, they have realization of the kind of realization related to the first noble truth. So it goes on like that. So the way the Four Noble Truths are explained through 3 insights, or in total 12 insights, is not a foreign kind of approach for the Mahayana and Tibetan or the Vajrayana Buddhism. So this approach goes through like that. Then it says that when it comes to the second noble truth, the origin of the suffering, then it says that this is the origin of the suffering, and abandon or get rid of the origin of the suffering. And then, though you can get rid of the origin of the suffering, but in its ultimate nature, you cannot get rid of it. Because in ultimate nature, origin of the suffering doesn't exist. So that is the second way of how the 3 insights related to the origin of the suffering. And then in the next level it goes to this is the cessation or the ceasing of the suffering. And then after that, attain or realize the ceasing of the suffering. Then finally it says that you can attain the ceasing of the suffering, the nirvana, or the cessation of the suffering, but it cannot be attained in absolute nature, because it doesn't exist in the absolute nature. And then finally, to the fourth noble truth, the true path. It says, this is true path, and then realize the true path. And once again, though you can realize the true path, but you cannot do it in its absolute nature. So it relates in that way to all these three different types of insights for each of these four noble truths. So now that is how it is explained in Theravadan tradition through that. But Theravadan tradition doesn't use the Mahayanist and the Northern tradition's style of explaining the Four Noble Truths through explaining the 16 characteristics. Explanation of the 16 characteristics has been quite unique approach of the Mahayana sutras and Mahayana kind of texts. So when we get to the 16 characteristics, first we have this. Now here, since in Tibetan language, if we read in Tibetan language, or if we read in original Sanskrit language, there is no contradicting words that appear. But most of the time, since we read in translated English language, there is kind of usage of different terms based on the preference of the teachers and the translators. So sometimes it may confuse the disciples. So for that reason, I have taken the different terms that has been used by different famous translators. So according to the Mahayana and Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we basically use the technique or the kind of teaching style of explaining this Four Noble Truths through explaining 16 characteristics. For a French translator uses, instead of the word characteristics, they use the aspects. So it's all dependent on which is more understandable to you or more preferable to you, which relates more to yourself. First characteristic is impermanence. So the base is 5 aggregates, 5 common or ordinary aggregates of a human being, and it is explained 5 common and ordinary aggregates of the human beings are suffering or are in true nature. It is nature of the suffering because first thing is it is impermanent. Now here another translator prefer to use the term non-static phenomena, but I think if I use that term, maybe many of you get confused. What is that? So you have to be quite cautious about and alert about usage of the terms. So this is first characteristic or the first aspect, and the second aspect or the characteristic of the suffering or the true suffering or the truth of suffering is the suffering itself. And here, another translator uses the word miserable phenomena. This is once again quite kind of distinct word that we seldom use, but people prefer to try their own explanation and their own kind of version of both. So this is the second characteristic. And the third characteristic, in general,